Oh, you can't tell?
No.
That's good. Oops, not on there. Oh, shoot. I set this to unlisted. Public. There we go. All right. If you keep, I'm checking the main page just to see if this pops up as a stream.
Okay.
You can do the same. If you just go to the,
Yeah, I'm at the YouTube page.
yeah, if you just go to the YouTube page. Why are we not bringing anything up? Okay, there we go.
Hello.
All right, once more, we had audio issues. Now can you hear me? It was not just you. All right, now you can hear. Rosalie, would you like to
Yeah.
say something and see if they can hear you?
Hello.
Can you hear both of us? So far, I've got a I can hear. I haven't gotten if they can hear you yet. Okay,
Yes.
so they can hear both of us. That is awesome. All right, for the third time, welcome to the Atheist Connection. This is a local Alaska-based show produced in association with the secular community of Anchorage, where I and members of our community get online and answer your questions. Just a chance for you to get to know us and just basically create cross-community connections between the secular community up here and the Christian or religious community. So, or anybody else. Whether you're a Christian and you just have questions for us, or want to yell at us as long as it doesn't get too long and too angry, or you're a doubter with questions, or a atheist or otherwise secular person looking for community, this is a place that you can reach out and find us. So we're not here to be fancy. There's nothing really extravagant about this. We're just here to talk to you and answer your questions. So we don't have any calls going on right now. We are up to fluctuating between 1 or 2 non-production involved people watching. So if you're there, feel free to give us a call, say hi. And until then, I guess we'll just kind of chat. Rosalie, you being the guest host this time, why don't you tell us a little bit about your, first off, your involvement in the secular community of Anchorage?
So I helped found the secular community of Anchorage. I helped write the charter and whatnot, and then file as a nonprofit with the state and whatnot. And now I am the secretary, and so I just take notes at the board meetings and make sure everybody has access to those. That's pretty much all I do right now.
So attend board meetings, like take notes, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Cool. So what led you into that community to begin with? Like, basically, what got you to identify as an atheist or consider yourself non-religious?
So I was raised Catholic, and then I didn't really ever believe in God or Catholicism at all. But my parents wanted me to go to church, so I went to church, was baptized. But sometime in high school, I realized I made a friend who said, I'm atheist. I was like, what's that? And he told me, and I was like, oh, that's me too. So that's how I became an atheist. I didn't tell anybody until college. I told my dad first, and he was fine with it. And my mom was cool with it too. And they're both like, as long as you're a good person, we don't care. So I had a really nice outing, I guess you could say.
Well, that's cool. It sounds like you were never really. It's hard to. It's at the point where it's hard to put labels on it, but it sounds like you were never really not an atheist in any sense of the word. Like you never really believed. You
No,
just found
I
out.
just
Go ahead.
yeah, I just thought church was something everybody did, and they didn't believe, but it was something you had to do. It wasn't until later that I realized not everybody believes, but some people do. So
Yeah.
yeah, and then I found the atheist group through Meetup. I listened to a podcast called Chariots of Fire. I'm not sure a whole lot of people have heard of it. I don't even remember how I found it, but they said if you want a local atheist group, to check out meetup.com, and that's how I found the Anchorage Atheists.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's how I did as well. I think the meetup group is where most people end up finding us.
Yeah.
What compelled you to do that? Like, if you had never see, from my perspective, I came from a very strongly fundamentalist background, and there was kind of a lot to unpack, and I felt a very compelling reason to get involved. What made you want to take that label on?
Um, I didn't. So I was living in Anchorage at the time, and I didn't have very many friends besides like a small group, and a lot of them were out of state for college or in a different city for college. So I was trying to find a new social circle, and I figured why not try the Atheist Society because I didn't want to go to church. I didn't really have many hobbies at that time, so I just tried the meetup group, and it turned out to be okay. I didn't go to a whole lot of stuff until about 6 or 7 years ago when I started going to more meetups. Um, I'm not sure why I dropped out for a bit, but
It seems
I
like a
don't
lot of
know.
people do within that group. It's just kind
Yeah,
of, and that's one thing I notice about the community is it's, it's not really, if you're watching this and you're not really sure if it's something you want to be involved in, it's really not necessarily a high intensity beat anti-religiousness over your head type of thing. Like
no.
people gather and become opinionated like atheists tend to do. Uh,
Hmm.
but a lot of it's just what we have like game nights and just get together and chat and talk. And to a large extent, it's just a way to show up and talk to people who aren't religious and just have a conversation without that being in the way. Is that your experience?
Yeah, and there's a lot of joking too, which is fun. But I do like, and you meet a lot of people from like all walks of life. There's people that have been atheists for like decades, and then some people that are new that are trying to get out of religion. And that's always interesting to hear other people's stories. And I like listening to other people's stories of how they become atheists or what they grew up as, because it's definitely different from mine most of
Yeah.
the time.
And especially if, depending on the background you came from, if you came from one where you really struggled to get out of it and to change your perspective and your point of view, it's really nice to have solidarity, just people
Yeah.
who share that in common. And you don't need, that doesn't need to be the focus of everything you talk about. But I've heard from other non believers in my life that it's nice just to show up and know that's never going to become a thing.
Yeah.
Even if
Yeah.
you don't talk about being not religious, nobody's going to suddenly start talking about religion in a put it in your face thing. And so it's just nice to be able to have that avenue for conversation, it seems like.
Yeah. And we try, the group does try and do social activities. So it's not all just non religion atheist talks. So we do bar crawls and coffee and conversations, and we try and do some community outreach stuff. We're trying to do more of that. Haven't had a whole lot of chances to do much of it, but
Okay, cool.
yeah,
So it sounds like your whole experience was pretty benign for the most part.
yeah. Not very interesting.
To spice it up a little bit, nobody's really showing up to yell at us yet. Maybe we'll get our Paul in the second half of this one again, or whatever. But and he was a nice guy. I'm not trying to say anything negative about him, but
Yeah.
until anybody shows up to really chat with us, have you had any experiences with people who did get a little confrontational or pushy, or have you had any of those kinds of
I did
conversations
have
with people?
I I did have a conversation that didn't end well with someone that I'm close to. They asked me what my beliefs were, and I told them. They asked me if I believed in God. I was like, no, I don't. They asked what do you believe happens when you die? I'm like, nothing. This is it. And by the end of that conversation, they said, um, I understand, but I feel sorry for you. And that just made me very angry, especially since it's a family member that said that to me. And I, they're supposed, I thought that they would accept it and not say things like that. So that was like one of the instances that I had a negative experience telling
Yeah,
someone about.
yeah. Those kind of things do happen, and unfortunately, if we're to make this at all educational or enlightening for anybody who's watching, if you're a young non-believer, one thing that I think people do tend to get caught off guard by, and I don't know if that was your experience in that conversation, it's that it can be surprising the reaction people have to remarks you make that are relatively benign. Um,
Yeah.
you think you're saying something just kind of factual about lack of belief in God or not going to church or not believing in a specific theology, and they can take it differently than you would expect they will, and the conversation can very quickly take a whole other tone.
Yeah.
And that's not just
Yeah.
religious people. That's people with all different kinds of things that are important to them. So I don't want to pin that on them, and it's certainly not all of them. But that is a pitfall you can run into if you've never been very religious like you, or even people who grew up very religious and all of a sudden, I don't know if you had this kind of moment, but there's a point where your perspective kind of switches. It can be gradual, and they can come in just really quick little changes of perspective. You don't see the religious conversation the way you had when you were a believer, and it's hard for you to really understand what the other person is bringing to the conversation. And so for your own sanity and experience, and also just out of consideration for the other person, I think it's important to try to be cognizant of how they're going to hear what you say, I guess.
Yeah.
Because that can get tricky.
Yeah. When it comes up in family circles, I tend to just not say a whole lot and just nod and listen. And if they ask me my opinion, I give it, but I try and word it in not a terrible way.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be hard, depending on the audience. I had a young cousin ask me, so you don't believe in Jesus? I was like, no. And it was this whole long conversation. He was about 8 or 9 at the time. So it was like, how do I explain this to an 8-year-old and not totally just crush his dreams or whatever? Because his family's pretty religious. So I wasn't wanting to push my beliefs onto him.
Well, in children, it's a whole other dynamic too.
Yeah.
There's a point of, I think they take things literally and factually, that adults, even if they believe literally, they know how to soften it a little bit in their minds, and absorb, I don't know, kind of put it in the context of reality, where a child, it's a lot more vivid to them. Yeah. And in addition, you simply don't want to be in the position of being anywhere near proselytizing someone's child or anti-proselytizing their child. So that's a tricky one.
Yeah, luckily he changed the subject to what he wanted to play when we got back to his house. So it wasn't terrible.
And that's usually where kids' minds are going to go anyway. So I guess that's the plus side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate. It sounds like you, even though your family, you said your parents were cool, you were never really powerfully into religion, and it seems like they were all okay with your deconversion. And I had that same experience too.
Oh, good.
But it still can get tricky when it comes up in conversation.
Yeah.
And,
with the extended family members, I don't know how to the extent of what they know about me, so I don't bring it up a whole lot. My grandpa on my mom's side was a deacon in the Catholic Church, and then my grandpa on my dad's side was a Baptist priest. So it's two different kind of fundamental.
Yeah, wait, I'm sorry, what were those again?
My grandpa on my mom's side was a Catholic deacon, not a priest, but one step away. And then my grandpa on my dad's side was a Baptist priest, and he started several churches around Alaska and traveled around and stuff. So
yeah, that's a bit of a different dynamic there, I can imagine. I've never really had a lot of experience with the Catholic side of it. Mine's almost been entirely Protestant, Pentecostal, or various forms of Baptist or just general Protestant denominations.
Yeah. No one too radical in our family on the Catholic side, luckily.
Okay. Yeah, my family, I came from a background that took it a lot more literally, but my family, I think, is pretty good about keeping things in perspective. It's not, you don't even have to compromise on your faith or not take your faith seriously. I think it's just an issue of putting it in the right place in the context of the conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
There are things I think are not great about religion, but I don't burst into a conversation with a believer immediately talking about the effects of teaching kids about hell, or the effects of creationism on the scientific literacy and things like that.
Yeah.
It's just not where you need to go. I might feel strongly about that stuff, but you don't need to be bringing it up in your first line in conversation. And really, there are social contexts where it's not really at all okay to bring that up at all, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think my family has been good about. I know that that's a challenge. I don't want to speak to their experiences directly over this kind of format, but broadly speaking, I can tell that it would be a challenge for anybody who really strongly believes in their faith and in literal realities of the Bible and heaven and hell and things like that. So I think it's important also to recognize what that means to them, and be a little patient when there is a little bit of tension or a little bit of difficulty, but then also recognize there are certain personal boundaries that you should be able to set that they should honor in conversation with you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, beyond that, we have still essentially our production team plus one or two watching, so not a lot of activity this time, which I was more or less prepared for. One thing I think might be interesting to recap is some of the conversations we had last time, if we're running out of other things to talk about, unless you have any other questions or comments or...
Nope.
Okay. Sorry, 1 second.
Yep.
I'm here with a pretty powerful cold, so I'm powering through it voice-wise and might just have to mute and turn away every once in a while.
No worries.
Yeah, for those who were watching last time, we had a conversation which I thought was interesting with Paul, I believe was the guy's name. He had some questions about morality as far as how it relates to religion and secularism. Were you there for that conversation? Did you hear that portion of it?
I didn't.
Okay, not to put you on the spot. Not everyone, shows up and listens to these whole things all the way through. Especially last time when you basically just sat there hearing me muted for, half an hour or something like that. But essentially, Paul said something pretty interesting. He mentioned the role of the Christian faith in developing Western morality, and essentially said in broad strokes that Rome was extremely barbaric. It was, I think, kind of the culmination or continuation of horrible barbarism in the ancient world. And Christianity, particularly in the form of Paul's letters, introduced a form of morality that really hadn't been seen before and was more or less, he had said, and I hate to paraphrase him too far, but just to try to summarize it.
Yeah.
Trying to say that it essentially introduced morality, I think, as we understand it now, more or less. Whatever decency we have in morality, he said it exists in the universe, but we have to discover it. And there's a lot to unpack there as far as semantics, I think. But that Christianity was responsible for that, and we essentially need Christianity for it. That essentially those morals exist. The fact that those morals exist as a thing that we have to discover, for one, is an indication of God. And I don't know if that was precisely his argument, but I think that was a portion of it, and that gets brought up by other people. And kind of crediting Christianity with wherever we're at morally right now, where I would attribute it more to a growth in our understanding of how to get along with each other through empathy and form rules based on social cohesion. Have you ever heard arguments along those lines from theists at all?
I haven't heard them. I read a book a long time ago when I was trying to figure out more about what atheism was, and I think it is called "What Is Atheism" by I can't remember the guy's name. Shoot, I have it just in the other room. But it did bring up the moral argument and the reasonings for finding it outside of religion. I can't remember what it said. It's just out of my brain now. But I have heard that or read about that.
Yeah, the moral arguments are one of the hardest things to unpack. It's usually going to be one of the first things that theists go to. Um, was it What is Atheism? A Short Introduction by
Yeah, by
Douglas Kruger or something?
yes,
Okay, that's
yes.
the one.
And that's I really like that book, and I've recommended it to a few people who are trying to figure out what atheism is, and because it is a short introduction and it's a quick read, so it's not too complicated.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's And do you remember what kind? Do you remember what kind of impressions you got from that book about that topic? Or
It brought in a lot of philosophy from different philosophers, especially I think ancient Greek and Roman.
okay,
um, I think there was some modern one too, modern philosophers in there too. It's not all just ancient.
cool.
But that section was kind of dense because
Yeah.
that is a dense argument.
Well, it's one of the most difficult thing, and I think, for one, morality is one of the most intuitive things for us to get our heads around, and it's also loaded with so much emotion. I don't think there are
Yes.
many things that we feel as strongly about, but also don't understand as morality. And there's so much instinct packed into it that it makes it an easy thing. Nobody's running around saying, "Where did the lightning come from? It must be the gods."
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of things, unless you go back to the beginning of the universe, we still have that more or less. But morality, it does puzzle us, and you can explain it to people 100 times, and you still run into roadblocks, and it still feels like you can explain how you empathize with somebody and their experience is important to you, and you can explain how we all understand that if we ran around behaving like X, Y, and Z, society would melt down and it wouldn't be pleasant for any of us.
Yeah.
Um, and that gets you to a point, but I think we still have this feeling that there's more. And I still think we still feel strongly enough that if we picture something horrible happening to somebody, something inside us tells us that something worse happened, or something happened that is bigger and more important than whatever clinical explanations we give, and those explanations almost start to sound offensive to them, if that makes sense.
Yes.
um, and so um, it's a super difficult thing to tackle, and uh, I've it's taken me a lot to unpack in the process of I've had a lot of these discussions with Christians. I've had a couple hour plus long debates with Christians about where morality comes from or if it's dependent on God and things like that. And very few things have helped me grow in my understanding of what life is like without God than that one. But it's very, very difficult.
I don't know if you watched this show, but The Good Place is
I was going to bring that up
a
actually.
lot of yeah. That's a really interesting show, not just because the concept, but like all the moral arguments they get into and the ethics, and that was pretty fascinating aspect of the show, and surprising that it did so well with like a wide group of people.
I've very rarely seen a show sugarcoat the medicine as well as that one does. Like,
Yeah.
you feel like you're just watching a really good comedy, and then you look back and all of a sudden you've seen a very nuanced critique of heaven and hell and of what that means without really hitting you over the head with this is terrible.
Yeah.
It got you thinking about it before you realize it, and then you look back again and realize you've just watched a lesson in moral philosophy.
Yes.
So it's a really amazing show.
Yeah, I just started listening to the podcast for the show, and the creator talks about Mike Schur talks about how he came to that to creation. He started with a religious point of view, and he started reading different religious texts on um, their point of view of the afterlife. And then he's like, "Well, no, I want this to be more like you get points and for the good things you do, and you lose points for the bad things you do. And depending on your score at the end, if you have a high score, you go up. If you have low score, you go down." And he wanted more like a video game. So he went into moral philosophy and ethics philosophy and read. a bunch of different books on the topic and kind of became a semi scholar, I think, in his research. So it's interesting how much research went into making the different arguments and stuff for that show.
That's cool. Yeah, I didn't realize there was not much background to it. It doesn't surprise me because it's extremely well thought out. I wish there would be more shows like that.
Yes, same.
But yeah, it's tricky. I think Paul took it to an interesting place where he acknowledged some of the basic principles of empathy and group cohesion and just pushed it back a little further to once things got a little difficult inside your small group, beyond your small group, you would have trouble empathizing with a large group. And we understand the necessity to do that. And that indicates proof in a God, or that indicates the existence of God. And I had said that I felt like that just pushes the boundaries out a little bit further to where you run into essentially, okay, we understand that God isn't necessary for any concept of morality, but if you push it into trickier territory where things get a little more difficult, maybe we can hide there. And I don't mean to paraphrase him in a mocking way, but that's essentially the mechanics of what I felt like was going on.
Okay.
We have actually a caller on. You ready for me to let this person on?
Yeah.
Alrighty, let's go for this. Hello, you are on with Jeremiah and Rosalie.
Hello, hello.
Hello, I think
Can you hear me?
recognize this voice. Yes.
Yeah, hey, this is Seth.
Hey Seth, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. So, did you have a question?
So I
go ahead.
Yeah, I just heard the statement you made about you want to really avoid proselytizing or deproselytizing other people's kids, and of course that seems pretty obvious. We all agree on that, but it doesn't seem to go both ways. I've had many experiences where my daughter, I take her to visit some friends, and they try really hard and I'm talking about like adults trying really hard to convince her, hey, you want to pray? It's really fun. You should pray with us. Or, hey, watch this cartoon, this a Jesus cartoon. And, you know, they're hoping for the best that they can convince this little kid. And I'm wondering the double standard on that is definitely there. And to me, it seems like the reason for it is that if you start putting ideas in a kid's head who is being indoctrinated into Christianity, they're a lot more likely to maybe accept those rather than if somebody is a kid who doesn't have Christianity. It doesn't, it's annoying when someone tries to proselytize to my daughter, but I don't worry that she's going to latch onto it because it sounds pretty ridiculous unless the child is continuously forced into a religion by their parents. They're probably not likely to take it on. So that just kind of struck me as I was listening to this, and I was curious what your thoughts are on this.
I don't have kids, so I don't feel like I can talk about this.
I think that's absolutely true. When I offer advice for how we should ideally behave, and maybe more to the point, what's more beneficial in how we behave, I say that knowing there is an extreme double standard in there, and that the consideration we're offering is not going to be reciprocated. I see that play out in my personal life in ways that, I don't want to go into details from multiple directions with people. But there is an expectation that you keep it to yourself, not even just with children, but in any conversational format.
Yeah.
There are a lot of ways that Christians feel comfortable bringing up their religion to people, whether it's with a stranger or with a child or a family member, that if you reverse that and came up with the atheist version of the same thing, it would sound totally conversationally inappropriate.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate, but I think it's just also the way it is, and there's not really a lot that I can think of that we could do to change that. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Like, is it something we just have to live with? Is it something we have to change perception of over time?
I think we could change perception over time as long as most of us, or the majority of us, are coming at it from a polite, logical argument. But it's going to be a struggle to have people accept that kind of conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had, Christians find it conversationally appropriate to basically, proselytize to my children in my own house, if it comes up, and I'll overhear it around the corner from time to time. Not most of them, but yeah, that's considered just, I think, something you do. And when you're raised, partly when you're raised in an environment where you think people's souls are at stake, and I think there's also an underlying assumption that Christianity is just virtuous and that's just what you're supposed to do. I don't know. It's just, I think it's one of those things people take as a given, and it sounds very different if I went over to someone's house and started trying to explain to them why I don't think there's a God, or, handed a kid junior version of the God delusion. I don't think that would go over as well as giving your son a Bible or, something by Josh McDowell.
Yeah.
I've noticed that even you don't even have to be trying to say anything anti-religious. You just have to say something that's a basic fact. For example, if you bring up, you see some beautiful rock formation, and you say, "Oh, you know what happened with this? Like, you happen to know the geology behind it. This number of millions of years ago, this continent collided into that one, and it pushed the rocks up. And isn't it cool?" You'll get some serious dirty looks from the parents, of course, and that's just a basic fact. So, directly addressing the double standard, I don't know if there's a way to do that, but maybe just somehow pointing out how fragile the mindset of the Christian child is compared to the mindset of a child who's being taught to think freely might help, maybe not everybody, but at least help people start to see just how ridiculous, how hard you have to try to make somebody believe Christianity as a child.
Yeah, I think part of what you're saying, there's a lot of this that has to do with just generally what's socially acceptable. Like, you can picture, what it looks like if I talk about a very aggressively stated religious post on Facebook, and you can see them persistently posted, whether it's praise the Lords or even as aggressive as reposts of things about how atheists are stupid, or an atheist professor got punched in the face, or an atheist got ate by a bear. Everyone giggles at those or laughs or whatever, and that's totally acceptable, even though those are extremely degrading. I don't take them personally because I know where the people are coming from, and I just don't think they put thought into it. But any mild suggestion of anything related to non-belief is seen as suddenly that's where things got ugly. And so there's that phenomena, but then there also is the one where I think a lot of what you're talking about, Seth, is there is this fragility to the process of instilling religion into children's minds. And really, I think as far as that goes, number one, I don't think we should be proselytizing people's kids. They shouldn't be with ours, but I don't think it's our place to be doing with theirs, and we come off horribly when we do. But part of it is really Christianity, at least in our culture as it's structured, is just going to be bleeding numbers no matter what. I think the internet, Hemet Mehta actually came up and did a talk about that. I don't know if you remember that, Rosalie.
Mm-hmm.
For 4 reasons, I think he gave a presentation on 4 reasons that Christianity is losing numbers or losing its kids. And really it depends so much on isolation and keeping kids sheltered. There's a reason that religious people are neurotic about keeping their kids sheltered and we're not. And it's not because we're both equally confident in the validity of our ideas or in how our kids are going to come out. I think really if you just give kids time, most of them are going to come at least drift away from fundamentalism, if not leave the faith. Unless we come to some major cultural shift that I don't know, makes that information less accessible or something. But yeah, I'm really not invested in my kids never becoming religious. I don't think that's really the approach that we need to take. And also, I don't know, I think they tend to land in a reasonably decent pace because I'm not invested in them becoming a fundamentalist in any form of belief.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, is that part of what you're saying, Seth? I got a little long-winded about that, I guess.
Yeah, and that was a good point about not being invested in your kids not becoming religious. If you give your kid a reasonable set of tools for critical thinking, and then they somehow take up religion, they're not likely to take up something that's damaging to them personally.
Yeah. Well, and I've made it clear to my kids, it's especially important because I'm not going to talk about the other side of it, but I co-parent with a Christian parent who I'm divorced from. And to me, from my perspective, it's important to me that I explicitly tell my kids, you're going to be okay whether or not you're religious or Christian. I'm still going to love you and I'll be equally proud of you, whatever conclusion you come to. And I allow them the freedom to operate accordingly and to explore whatever they believe accordingly. And as long as you're not hateful, I mean, I'm not going to extend that same consideration if you become a neo-Nazi or something like that. But as long as you're being decent toward other people and thinking through things responsibly, that's really all I can ask of you. And I think it's important that, we give that freedom to kids and take that pressure off of them to be what we want them to be, whether it's non-religious or religious or whatever. So, yeah. Have you run, Seth, in your environment, have you run into that a lot? You said it's come up from time to time. Do you run into that kind of direct indoctrination very often?
Not too often. It's when I travel back to where I grew up.
Oh, okay.
Or when I visit people that I've known for a long time, that shared the upbringing with me. So it could be they feel like they have a license because they're just continuing on with what we've all been taught. But they also know very well that I don't agree with those beliefs anymore, and they attempt it. It doesn't happen at all where I live now. I'm living in the Bay Area, California.
Oh yeah, I can't imagine you run into a lot of Bible thumping in that neck of the woods.
No, it's nice.
Well, one aspect of this, I think, is it's unfortunate, but I think one thing people in those situations don't realize is they're just shooting themselves in the foot. When they approach children that way or hold that kind of conversational expectations with them, I think they're just reflecting on themselves to the child. And that's unfortunate, but one way I've detached myself from that kind of thing, whether it's people approaching my children about religion or from multiple angles, I have had people express their opinions about me to my children. You just recognize that, number one, you can't control that beyond just being there for your kids to speak to you about it. And number two, recognize those people are doing their own damage. They're not really hurting you. They might be creating some confusion with your children. But really they're digging in and basically dying on a hill that they don't need to and creating social problems for themselves that they don't need. I don't know if I'm totally right about that, but that's one way I've reconciled myself to that, to living with that, essentially. And I don't know if that's an inclination that you've had as far as how to address that or not.
Yeah, for me, it's, I think when you said the social damage that it does to themselves,
Mm-hmm.
that's definitely been the case because, yeah, it doesn't do any good for anybody. But as a result of it, I'm just less inclined to want to hang out with them. Like, I just feel it's a deliberate disrespect of me. And it's also tacky. It looks desperate. When you see a full-grown adult trying to, use dramatic facial expressions to convince a kid of something, and the kid's like, "Nah, I don't think so." It just kind of makes you think, my friend is maybe not the cool person I remember. Maybe I should. I don't really care to go hang out over there. It's just not that fun.
Yeah.
So it's not like a spiteful thing. It's not like a fear thing. It's a, dude, come on, I want to enjoy hanging out with you, not watch you put yourself on this sort of display and disrespect me in that way. I mean, when someone does something disrespectful to you, it totally, no matter how inconsequential it may be, it's annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's.
And for the record, this is never happens with family. It's friends, that I've grown up with. So I'm lucky in that way as well.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, for me, and for me, maybe for that same reason, it's been very rare for me. I don't think I've experienced anything of the intensity that you're talking about. It's more just been people being a little free to give my kids materials or just make a little sideways remark here or there. But it hasn't been much. I haven't really experienced much of it intensely. So I don't know. I think most people have been considerate enough that I haven't found it to be a problem, and certainly not within my family anything that I would want to engage with people less because of.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a tricky thing because I don't know. From your perspective, how did people take it when you decided, or did you ever convey that to them, or did it ever become obvious that you didn't want to hang out with them for that reason?
It was probably fairly abrupt that I just stopped making an effort.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not they read that sign, it's I don't know. It almost sounds passive aggressive, but it was way more like, hey, next time I'm in this city, do I feel like calling this person or not? No, not really. And then so a lot more months go by than usual. If you visit the city periodically, a lot more months go by than usual when you call. It's just that I don't really feel like it. I don't want to spend my time going into this environment. So after some time, this one person started like reaching out a lot more often, like, hey, saying silly things. And I'd respond just with just enough information, but I just didn't really care to hang out.
Yeah. Well,
and I wouldn't confront somebody on that, just because it just turns into a conversation that you know how these conversations go when you're talking to someone who's holding on to this belief that it's their mission to convince people that hell is real. It's going to be a very long, tedious conversation that you're never going to get that time back, and it's never going to go anywhere. So I found the best way is just to pick who you want to hang out with. Fortunately, it's not family, so I don't have to go through that. If it was family, of course, it'd be worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of the problem is this isn't all religious people by any means. But I think most religious people who are going to be like that, I don't think they're going to see your decision not to continue engaging the same way you do. I don't think it has to be an angry thing, and I don't think it needs to be any kind of passive aggressive gesture or whatever. It's simply drawing a personal boundary. Like nobody's going to want to keep going to the house of somebody who's trying to sell them Amway the whole visit. And especially
that's exactly the way it feels. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of Christians, legitimately, probably most of them would get that. They would never be talking to you that way to begin with, or your children. And if you quit hanging out, they would understand. But the ones who are like that, I don't think they would know how to read it as anything other than an affront to their faith, or you trying to hit back at them versus just, hey, this isn't a pleasant way to spend a visit. This is not conversationally appropriate behavior. Of course, they would instantly see it if you were trying to explain evolution to their kid or something like that. But yeah, that's one of those, I think that's typical double standard things.
Yeah. Well, cool. This has been very, thanks for taking my call. It's really interesting to just flesh this topic out.
Yeah. Thanks.
To me, it's all seeming to come. Oh yeah. Yeah.
What'd you say?
Oh, to me, what I just got out of this whole thing is, I think it just goes back to the fragility of the process of indoctrination. And that to me stands out pretty obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One, it kind of tells us I think one thing it informs in us is we shouldn't be aggressive because of the social cost. I think one thing we need to remind ourselves is our behaving that same way is just as bad as them doing it. And I don't think we do that as often, but you don't want to lose track of that. But then also you really don't need to, because the process is so fragile. And I think really you'll have the best effect. Even if you're trying to be strategic, you would have the best effect just by showing up and being a decent person and showing people, hey, an atheist is just a normal person who's going to show up and be polite and defy their stereotypes of you. And really, that's a lot what this show is meant to do. If people start to show up a little bit, the goal would just be to show them that we're people that they can talk to. I think maybe the whole idea seems a little intimidating, or, that they're walking into our church to get our message shoved down their throats, or to see us just be the arrogant stereotype. And I don't fault them for perceiving that that's what it is, because they've been trained to think that, and they may have met some people who are like that, unfortunately. But more than being argumentative, this is just a chance for them to have that conversation that hopefully I would have across the table with somebody who believed, and we just either just chatted about normal things, or if it came up, we could just be polite about it and take it for what it is and put it in its proper place conversationally.
I was about to drop, but it just makes me think of something else. If you have time here.
Oh yeah, we have lots of callers lined up, but please go ahead.
Yeah, and that is, given that we don't particularly care, I mean, I certainly don't have any interest in convincing someone else's kids of anything. So that may contribute to the double standard. As a Christian, you're mandated to convince everybody of your message, and that doesn't exclude children. So if a Christian does that, as annoying as it is, as inappropriate as it is, it at least has some sort of a purpose. If an atheist does that, it just looks like you're just causing trouble. And that's all it is. And that's all it is in either case. But given that we don't have any reason to want to do that, of course, it would make it look a lot worse. So
I take a little issue with that. And I don't think you're saying that to a logical conclusion that someone could take it to. But I actually was confronted with that same thing. I was given the argument, hey, we feel compelled to continue doing this. We cannot give ground to you as an atheist because these are the stakes, essentially. Basically, it's scorched earth on the debate. We can't give you any quarter. We can't show any decency to your point of view. You probably saw some of this play out in Facebook by somebody who ended up blocking me and was a very volatile person. But yeah, I've run into that mentality, and they say we can't do this because the reality of heaven and hell compels us to keep pushing. And we've all, I don't know if you've heard it, Rosalie, but I'm sure Seth and I both have from the denominations that we've grown up more on the Protestant evangelical side. If people's houses were on fire, you would have to run around and yell and get them out of the house at any cost. And politeness and everything would not factor into it. And I've been confronted with that argument. And my response to that is, sure, that's the worldview as you that's your worldview as you understand it, and it might make you feel compelled to do that. But what you need to understand is that there is a social cost for that. If you're going to behave that way, number one, we're approaching the point where you do need to take responsibility for what you've let yourself be led to believe, I think, as an adult. There is a level of implausibility to that you need to own if that's what you want to live your life as having a priority. But also, you just need to recognize you're making a choice. We all have choices. And if you think that running around shouting at people or persistently evangelizing, whether it's to children or whoever else, or showing disrespect to atheists, if you think that's a mandate you have because of the importance of heaven and hell, that's fine, but you need to understand what that looks like to other people, and that even if you feel like your action is legitimate, you need to also understand that their response to it is legitimate. And you can't expect them to sit back and say, oh, okay, I get it, I'm fine, because of how it's important to you, if that makes any sense. And then the other side of it to me is, and I don't think this is what you're trying to say, but I'm afraid this is what some people hear in it, an implication that zero stakes on our side, because we don't have the equivalent of heaven or hell that accompanies the afterlife. I think there are very important things, such as religion confuses people's reasons for being moral and lets certain biases and stuff seep into their sense of morality, because they're basing it on fundamental dictates versus really an understanding of how to act toward other people and the consequences of their actions. Putting hell in kids' minds is horrible, and it creates tribal boundaries that, starting from childhood, that people don't need to have in place between themselves and others. There are all these different things that, even if it's not the same intensity, that it is important to me, not that people become anti-religious or non-religious even, but that some of these products of religion, that we at least eat away at them. So I guess maybe you're right in the extent that we don't feel the need to flip people on the spot, but I certainly feel that it's important to at least put my perspective out there and erode at people's thinking. I think we just have maybe we have that lack of urgency, and that's part of what you're talking about, to immediately save people's souls.
Yeah. For me, it's drawing a distinction between kids and adults, because I do have, of course, a desire to influence those in the community around me, to get them to understand that people who are different from them are just different from them, and not only are we different from you, you're different from us, you're different from other people. Differences are part of living in a society. And it's very important, of course, to help people to see that people who are different are good people. But I don't have, so when I say I don't have any interest in doing that to other people's kids, it's that, yes, I would like other people's kids to see that message, but I can decide ahead of time, I'm going to be, this is a child. I can draw a very clean line and say, I'm not trying to influence this person's child.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by zero stake.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying.
And I don't think you can draw that line as
And I don't think you were making the point that I was countering. I think I could hear people, I could see people hear that, and I think there's some nuance to flesh out there that would be important.
Yeah.
But I could even see a kid who has the idea of hell being put into his or her mind, and the stress of trying to conjure a relationship with God and knowing the stakes of not being able to do it and wanting to save them from it. But yeah, like you said, you recognize that it's not our place to save them from that, even just as it's not the place of a Christian to try to save our kids from the hell that they think might be coming. So,
Yep.
yeah, I think that is a good place for us to wrap up, and we're at the 3:00 point, and I want to make this a hard cutoff time for the sake of all our families and personal lives and stuff. So, thank you, Rosalie, for showing up and
Yeah,
talking
no problem.
with us. Thank you, Seth, for calling in. It was fun chatting with you again.
Yeah, thanks, Steph.
Yeah, thank you.
And for everybody
you.
else, the 1 to 2 to 0 people who are on, other than Seth and us and the production team, thank you for showing up. And we will see you generally first Sunday of every month. This was an exception, but yeah, we'll see you then. Thank you.